Welcome to Attenuation, a weekly podcast where two friends come together to drink beer, discuss beer styles and trends, and just generally ruminate on the meaning of life, aka beer. If you enjoy your time with us, we invite you to become a weekly listener and subscribe to the podcast. Without further ado, here is this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of Attenuation, a beer podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm joined by my best friend since 8th grade, Stephen. Today
Hello.
Nice.
I jumped right over. You're like,
weird.
You're excited.
I'm excited to do this. So, we thought, now technically this is season 2.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed, but
You could have changed the intro, I guess. You were trying.
I didn't tell you I wrote a new intro. No. Same intro. We still don't have it down, though.
Yeah.
Whole season of practice. But today, so I've always been very unhappy because our first episode, the audio was really bad. And that was an important episode because we were talking about our journey into craft beer. So now that we have our audio bugs worked out, I really wanted to revisit our journey into craft beer and just give it a fresh shot. It'll probably be a completely different episode because I honestly have I don't remember what we said in that one. But yeah, a good way to start season 2 is just to kind of re-examine our journey into craft beer. So.
I almost went back to listen to it just to remember. And then I started and I was like, oh, this is too cringy. Just do a whole new one.
Yeah. The audio is really bad. And then, I don't know. The more you create stuff, the looking back is always really hard. As if you're improving and refining, which I'm not even 100% sure we're doing. But I know the audio is better, and that's for sure.
At least one thing is better. It's still us. It's still me and you. So that's not getting any better.
That can't change, but yeah. Okay, so of course, before we get into the episode main topic, we have to do the best part of the podcast, and that's drinking beer.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna introduce my beer, give some nose notes, and then I'll pass it over to Stephen to introduce his. So I am drinking a beer from Wolf's Ridge Brewing, and they're based in Columbus, Ohio. And this is called Todd's Cupcakes. And this is a coffee cake pastry stout. Very specific. And it has quite a list of adjuncts. It says it has single origin cacao, Madagascar vanilla, Vietnamese cinnamon, and single origin coffee from Papua New Guinea.
Is this Dogfish Head or?
Right. I know, it's like they're so specifically weird in their additions. But yeah, I think I really like pastry stouts. So when I saw this one, I had to give it a try because I like my long lists of flavors. So this is pouring a nice dark, basically jet black color. It's not super thick. Now this isn't barrel aged, so it's not gonna be. Well, it is 12.2%, but I don't think it's going to be quite as thick as, maybe a barrel aged. And you can see it has a very thick, very super fine foam head, that kind of that light tan brown color. And it's sustaining, so it looks like it's going to stick around for a while. Oh, and the main thing I get right off the nose is chocolate and coffee. And I am getting the cinnamon and the vanilla. It smells good. I'm going to dive in while you introduce your beer.
All right, I picked this beer up yesterday at my local brew shop. It was highly recommended by the owner. I had never heard of this brewery before. It's Wild Mind Ales from Waunakee, Wisconsin, and it is called Electric Rainbow. It is a sour ale with raspberry, peach, and lemon, and it's dry hopped with Azacca hops. It should be interesting. I like the hoppy sour, a very important part of my beer journey, so kind of a good beer to drink for this episode.
I've never heard of Azacca hops.
Yeah, apparently it's a hop out of Washington State. Has a light tropical aroma and some pine and citrus flavors too.
Cool.
So this is pouring like a fruit punch red from the raspberry edition, I assume. No head, just a very fast, fizzy, light carbonation.
Oh wow, that looks crazy.
Yeah.
If it wasn't carbonated, I would almost say it looks like wine.
Yeah, kind of wine looking. Yeah, very like very fruit punch colory. But the fizzing is like, it's very bubbly. It's just, there's no head. And there's some stuff floating in it too. So they did not do a whole lot of clarification on this. The nose is like raspberry jam, kind of a tart lemon aroma, with just a slight tinge of like hop aroma, kind of that like lemony, piney hop aroma. But it's very subtle. Mostly coming through is like the raspberry jam aromas. Okay, I'll dive into this.
Okay, this Todd's Cupcake is an interesting one. So it describes itself as a coffee cake pastry stout. On entrance, there's almost like dry baker's chocolate, and then it transitions to like, it almost feels like you're drinking cold brew coffee, and then there's the sweet vanilla, and then it kind of transitions into this really long bitter coffee finish, and then maybe there's like the slightest hint of cinnamon on the end. It's good, but like I said, it's not really striking me as coffee cake. It's more of like a coffee stout. But the one thing I'm really impressed by is it's 12.2%, and I can't taste any hint of alcohol whatsoever. So that's really impressive.
Wow.
Yeah. So they did good there. I just a little bit not exactly what I was expecting, but I do like it.
Nice. Thumbs up.
Yes, I would drink it again, but I wouldn't super classify it as not really. It's not really desserty to me. It's more like a coffee stout. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, mine is pretty interesting. It is mouth puckeringly sour. It is really sour. It's like put a lemon in your mouth sour. It is very, very sour. Very raspberry. I just don't get the peach, and I don't know whether that's just because raspberry is too overwhelming, but I don't get the peach. But I definitely get the raspberry, and the lemon sourness is it's pretty overwhelming. This is one where I'd want to share this like 4 ways.
It's a little much. Yeah.
Yeah, just drink like 3 ounces and like enjoy it. Like a whole 16 ounces of this is just too much. I guess just too sour, which is saying a lot for me, but it's like Warhead burn your tongue sour. Like, it is pretty harsh. They were really going. The other thing I don't really get is the hoppiness. Just a little bit in the finish maybe, but it's very, very, very subtle. I just think it's just more like a compliment to the lemon flavors, but that's about it.
So would you drink it again if you had 3 people to share it with?
I think so. Yeah, I think it would be fun to like have some other people try it for sure.
Gotcha.
With me.
Okay, fair enough. It does intrigue me when you say it's that sour, because I do really like mouth puckering sour.
Yeah, you might like it.
Okay, cool. So next up we have beer news.
Yeah, so this beer news is coming out of Australia. So I did not know about this previously, but apparently there's this Australian International Beer Awards. It's the world's largest craft beer competition. So breweries from all around the world, Russia, China, Great Britain, tons of Australian beers, and then, brewers from the United States also send their beer. In total, it was like over 2,300 breweries that had beers entered into the competition. And it's kind of cool. They have like a scoring system. So any one beer can achieve a score that puts them in the level of gold, silver, bronze. So in each category of beer, there might be like 5 golds and 10 silvers and 12 bronzes or something like that. Like your beer can achieve a score that puts you into the category of a medal. So it's kind of cool going through. There were tons of breweries. I didn't recognize a lot of breweries in like Sydney, Australia, which seems like an amazing beer town now that I'm looking at these awards. But it was cool to see some familiar breweries like Fremont got gold with their bourbon barrel-aged coffee iteration of their Dark Star, I believe. Anderson Valley from Boonville, California, their bourbon barrel Imperial Stout Huge Archer also got gold.
It's really cool because I'm scanning I found their website and they have all the results posted. When I'm noticing, because I went to the international category, it's cool because you have craft beer from like the top 3 in the champion international beer, You have a vanilla coffee Imperial Stout from China, a beer called Heavy Smoker from Taiwan, and then a beer Savage from New Zealand. It's really cool. Just I'm so unaware of, like what the craft beer scene is like in Taiwan, but obviously they're making some good craft beer. So that's really cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Now that's going to be we'll have to add this to our bucket list.
I know, now we're to travel the whole world.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is really cool. And the other funny thing too is that, like, some of the breweries that scored gold in like the American Pale Ale category were from Australia and other countries. So it's just cool to see other countries making American styles.
That's really awesome.
I guess that's the new wave of craft beer, right? Like everybody making
really cool.
styles from everywhere else. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like when we're doing all of our deep dives into these historic styles from Europe, and you have American breweries kind of paying homage to those. It's kind of crazy to think in some international competition, people are doing like West Coast IPA, but
right, exactly.
But made in Taiwan, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is really cool.
Now here's the big question: can you go to this competition and taste all the beers, or is this like
no? Yeah, it's a closed yeah, it's not a beer festival. It's just a competition.
All right, we have to get on the panel. We got to get our level 4 or whatever certification.
It would definitely be cool. I mean, Australia is, I think it might be the next best place to get hops other than the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, okay.
Tons of hops in Australia. So it makes sense that Australia would be like a huge craft beer spot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, it was cool to read and cool, like I said, cool to see some familiar breweries making the list and scoring gold. So
internationally too. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so into the main topic. How did we end up making a podcast about beer? Where did it all start, Steven?
Well, I guess you want to start from the very beginning, kind of to rehash this. I did not like beer at all. I grew up not drinking any alcohol and didn't really even have my first taste of alcohol until I was maybe 22 and a half, 23 maybe. And so I skipped all that, the dirty 30 in the in the open field when I was 16.
Yeah, sure.
So I kind of skipped that whole phase of the craft of beer, and then just as I was getting into alcohol in general, the craft beer scene in the United States and especially in California was really, really blowing up at that point. By then you had certainly Sierra Nevada and Russian River were very, very well established, and then all these other breweries were popping up. But yeah, I certainly did not like beer at first. Pabst Blue Ribbon was kind of my first entryway into beer in general, and that was fine, got me drunk, right? Did the job. But when it came to beer, I especially craft beer like IPAs and stuff, I didn't like it at all. So I tended towards wine at first and drank a lot of wine. My wife likes wine. Definitely did some trips to Napa and started to get a taste for some wine. Still didn't really even like the bitter, heavier red styles of wine. I liked, lighter whites and Sauvignon Blancs and stuff. And then I kind of crossed into the cider world. We have some really good ciders in California. Ace Cider in Sebastopol, California is really good. That's where they grow all the apples, so obviously they make good cider there. So I had access to really good cider, and I love cider. I liked the sweet. And I guess that's kind of everybody's, like, if somebody's asking how to get into beer in general or even into wine, you always kind of steer them towards the sweeter styles because those are going to be easier to drink. And so I liked cider for that reason. It was sweet. Alcohol was usually right around 5%, so it wasn't killing me. And then, we talked about Russian River. That was kind of an eye-opening experience because we went there together, and I just didn't understand IPAs at all at that time. I just didn't understand the draw. They were just too bitter for me. But we got down towards the end of the flight, and they had their barrel aged sours. And again, at the time, I didn't even realize I was drinking like some of the greatest sours in the country.
Well, it's funny because all of those beers were lost on you. Because,
yeah.
And we've talked about this before, kind of like if you take someone, we were reading about that one lady, like, wasn't her first beer like Pliny the Younger or something like that?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, it's so lost on you just because you need so much more context and information to appreciate something. But yeah, when we were at Russian River, of course I did the thing I always do. That's why I'm so surprised that you were surprised when we went on our most recent beer trip and I was just ordering flights right and left because I thought I set that standard early. But yeah, we got the full flight at Russian River.
I mean, I get the strategy, but
yeah. And that's a massive flight. The Russian River flight is gigantic.
Yeah, it's like everything.
Yeah. So, and at that time, with your like lack of experience and knowledge, you probably like Pliny the elder was probably in that lineup, and you probably took one sip of it and was like, "Oh, this is disgusting."
Yeah, I didn't understand why so many people were buying. Like it was leaving like by the crate.
It was too. Yeah, people like everyone comes in, drinks, and eats, and then as they leave, they like walk out with their case or 2 cases of Pliny. So, but yeah, you hit those barrel-aged sours and suddenly the light went off for you, I think.
Yeah. So these like consecration, what's the other, supplication,
all the Asians,
and they're, even when you go back to them now, they're very complex, very interesting because they're funky. There's Brettanomyces, they're wild fermented, like they're funky, but like it was so different, and they weren't bitter, and they had like complex fruit flavors. And I think like coming from wine, like I had some appreciation for that, and they were like sort of wine complex, but like easy to drink. And I was just like, oh, I didn't even know they made beer like this. Like I really didn't, I didn't even know what sour beer was really. So to drink that and think, oh, like there's a place for me in this world, because I was really starting to think like, like I'm glad I'm here. Like I know Jason's appreciating this. Like this is cool, but I didn't really think there was like an actual place for me.
I think that's a common experience though, because I kind of felt the same way. Like even when I first started drinking beer, so I did start a little earlier than you. But, in those days, you just drank whatever you could get your hands on. I think the first thing I ever drank with alcohol in it was Mickey's, which is not great. It's like malt liquor, right? Yeah.
Okay.
And then I quickly transitioned into like a Miller Genuine Draft. I really liked MGD for whatever reason. And I really liked 211. I don't know if you know what that is. Steel Reserve.
211? No, never heard of that.
These are not high quality products. They exist to get one job done, and that job is intoxication. But yeah, but I never really liked beer, if that makes sense. In the beginning, I just kind of drank it for the effect, obviously. And it wasn't until Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was kind of the first beer that I got exposed to. I know I went to the brewery at some point, and that kind of started to open my eyes to it. But yeah, it is, and it's kind of funny because there's a parallel to it. And I also really like cigars, but I know almost nothing about them. But I've learned really quickly, I'm kind of at the end of the craft beer journey where like I really like barrel-aged stouts and stuff like that, but that's not something you generally want to start on. In the cigar universe, I've kind of learned the same thing of like I need to stay away from the things that are really dark. Because they have like these Madura and double Madura like cigars. They're too potent. The flavor profiles are too strong. There's too much going on. And I have like no ability to appreciate it. So I always look for like the most mild. Like I gotta start, and it's kind of like same thing with beer. Like it's the universe of beer is so intimidating, and it takes a long time to appreciate. Like just because you started to appreciate like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale doesn't mean you're suddenly going to appreciate like this barrel-aged stout, if that makes sense. So you almost have to like get a foothold in something that's approachable. And I think actually, interestingly, if you have that background in wine like you had, those were a good foothold for you because you liked wine and you liked ciders at that point.
Yeah.
So now you had a nice foothold, and then slowly but surely you kind of broaden your horizons and you work your way towards the more complex stuff. But it does seem like that is the case and it's also true of Scotch as well. Like, you want to start at something that's drinkable, and then or as drinkable as you can stand it. And then you slowly challenge yourself by drinking things that you think are undrinkable. And then a day comes when you're like, oh, I actually like this. And it's a very weird transition.
Yeah.
And it's a weird switch that goes off in your head where, like, it's almost like you go from not liking something to not minding it to craving it. And those last two steps can be really quick, especially like once an IPA clicks for you, you might find yourself craving that hop bitterness. And it's very strange because it can happen very quickly. Yeah, but so you tasted those Russian River sours and you thought, okay, there is a home for me in this wild world of craft beer.
Yeah. And the problem at the time was that there weren't a lot of sour beers. You know, it wasn't like now where there's more sour beers on the shelves than there are IPAs, really, I feel like now. But yeah, it just wasn't a popular style. And, you know, we're really, at that time, like in the hops race, where breweries are trying to make the hoppiest beers and they're pushing IBUs up above 100 and finding new ways to hop the beers, whirlpools and torpedoes and stuff like that. So I knew that there was a place for me. I just didn't, like, it was just hard to find. And then it wasn't until we went to Sierra Nevada and did the brewery tour, which is kind of fun. Like you said, when you get your hands and your nose into the fresh hops, that tends to unlock something. But I still, you know, even at the end of that tour, drinking beers on tap, like, nothing really spoke to me until I drank Otra Vez, which is a Goza. And that was really the first time I'd ever even heard of that style. And then, like, that was the beer. It was like, I want every Goza I can possibly find ever.
It's a tipping point.
Yeah, which again, not easy to find at the time.
I know. Yeah, see, if you're just starting craft beer now, you're very spoiled for choice. Because I do feel like the spectrum has not only widened, but the number of choices within each style has increased a lot. Because there was a day when, IPA was king. I mean, it's still super, super popular. But I feel like in the early days of craft beer, it was overwhelmingly dominant.
Yeah, I mean, that was all that was on tap. It felt like, you know, it was like an amber and IPAs, and then, of course, you had the darker stuff.
Yeah.
I felt like that was it.
Well, I still remember, like, pre-craft beer revolution at all. Like, I mean, obviously I'm not that old, but I do remember we go to the grocery store and my dad would be like, oh, we're going to get a good beer, quote unquote. And we would go to the beer section and there would be, you know, the beer. And there's probably, like, Sierra Nevada probably had pale ale in the grocery store at that point. But I remember, like, what he considered a good beer. And what it made sense, too, at the time was there would be Chimay in, like, the glass bottle. They had the blue. Yeah, the blue and the red. And it was like, oh, it's this big bottle of beer. It was made by monks. It was, like, the coolest thing ever. But there weren't, like, bombers in the grocery store. There was, like, a couple. There'd be, like, Chimay. And I want to say, like, Arrogant Bastard existed back then, too. But I could be wrong. Yeah. So we'd get a bottle of Chimay and we'd think it was, like, the coolest thing ever. And then, you know, only a few years later, probably from when I was drinking those, suddenly you saw more and more bombers. That place in the grocery store with bombers got, like, a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And then it's funny now because now we've watched the bomber section. It's almost like sprung into existence. And now it's, like, completely disappeared again. And now everything comes in the tall 4-pack of cans. But yeah. So it's kind of been crazy to watch the evolution. But yeah, that was, like, a good beer back then. It's pretty funny.
I remember, like, after our very first episode, looking that up when you talked about it, I was like, I've never heard of that. And my
Chimay?
And my wife was like, oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's still around. I think it's pretty famous, and I mean, it's not unique at all now. Like, there's monk beer left and right now. I know even Sierra Nevada, I don't know if they make it anymore, but they partnered with, like, a monastery to make a beer at one point, and it was really good. I don't remember what it was called, but I don't know if they still do it. But yeah, I mean, it's around now, but I think they were, and obviously, like, we've done some of our deep dives. That's a huge part of beer history, is like being made as something to support like a monastery. But it is cool that, it still exists today, and it's like the real deal. But yeah, that was like one of the only good quote unquote beers I had ever had. So now you've entered the craft beer world via Russian River barrel aged sours.
Yeah.
And you've transitioned into Goza via a Otrobes, which now they've changed the recipe. So
yeah,
sadly, you can never drink that Otrobes again.
I know, it's terrible now.
Okay, so now you're obsessed with Gozas. Now I remember this stage quite clearly.
Yeah.
When you were in your Goza stage. But
Yeah.
do you remember, and I think I know, it's coming back to me now, what we recorded. So your next transition was, I think something clicked for you in the IPA universe at Moonraker.
Yeah, Moonraker. So a combination between Pineapple Fields, which was a hoppy sour from Stillwater Partisan Ales.
Okay.
That I got off of Tabor. I started getting on Tabor looking for sours and gozas. So I got this hoppy sour, and that kind of was like approachable style for me because I liked the sourness, but the hop like undertones, like I started to understand like, oh, okay, I get like what hoppiness is, and I get those flavors now. Okay, I understand that, but it was in the context of a beer that was not bitter, and it was nice and like fruity and sour, which was nice. I think it's like a wild fermented ale with pineapple and sage, I think, and then they dry hopped it. So it was dry hopping too. So, again, not adding a lot of bitterness, just some tropical flavors. So yeah, it was just a really good beer, and that kind of unlocked a little bit. And then, yeah, like you said, Moonraker in Auburn, California. It's kind of funny because even though I didn't like love all these styles yet, I've always been chasing like the best beer. I remember Moonraker beat Russian River. Their triple IPA beat Pliny the Younger in a blind taste test of triple IPAs. And that was like a huge deal because nobody ever beat Pliny the Younger. So that kind of put them on the map. And I was like, oh, we like have to go out there and just try their beers. And it ended up that they had all of these New England style IPAs, which I had never really heard of, but they were supposedly hazy, unfiltered, and they, were branded as less bitter. And so drinking IPAs there, it was like a whole new world. I was like tasting the hops for the very first time. And then especially because you're getting a flight, so I'm doing side-by-side tastings and being like, oh, this one has all these flavors. And then you go to the next one and like, oh, I can taste this and this and this time. And their ability to create such flavorful beers out of the hops, it was just incredible. And it was even more incredible for me as a first-timer, being able to like taste the hops in a more approachable setting.
It's funny that you mentioned that too, because I was having a similar experience. At that point, I already liked IPAs, but I think when we went there, that was my first big exposure to like the New England style, where they're doing a lot of the dry hopping, and they weren't as bitter. And I just remember I was like falling in love with them too. I was like, wow, this is such an interesting version, and they were all hazies. I feel like they were like so ahead of the curve on haze, at least in our local area. And I had a similar experience of like, wow, these are amazing. Like, I want to drink all this style now. So yeah, that's really cool that we kind of had a similar experience. Even though we were like a little bit different part of our beer journey, I definitely had like some light bulbs turn on when we went to Moonraker for the first time. Okay, so Moonraker opened you up to New England IPAs.
Yes. And then from there, it was kind of a search. It's kind of funny. Every time I get into a beer style, it was like at a time where that beer style was not that popular.
You're cursed.
So then it just became sort of a hunt for those kinds of beers. And it also did, like you said, it sort of unlocks, and you go from tolerating to like not liking something to tolerating something to then craving it. And that's when I started sort of like craving hop flavors. And up until then, I mean, it's really funny. Like looking back at like some of the first beers I got on Tabor, it was so funny because so many of the descriptions of the beers would be like tropical flavors, and I had this one from Three Magnets Brewing that was called something some sort of fruit blender or something, but it was like no fruit was harmed in the making of this beer or whatever because it was all from all the fruit flavors were from the hops.
Right.
And in my mind, I'm just thinking like all these fruit flavors, and then I get them, and I drink the beer. I'm like, oh my god, this is horrible. And really, it was just like I was completely unable to parse out fruit flavors from the hop bitterness. Like I just couldn't do it.
Well, I think a lot of things have to happen. Like one, you have to get used to the hop bitterness, and then you start to notice it less. And two, you have to realize like I think a lot of people think like, oh, this beer is gonna be like taste like pineapple. They're thinking like pineapple juice, like with sugar in it. You know what I mean? But
yeah, exactly.
It's not gonna taste like that. It's gonna taste like I don't know exactly how to describe it,
but
it's
dry
like
pineapple.
Yeah, like dried
not
pineapple.
Sweet pineapple.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something I just didn't understand at the time because I was like, I still had beers that were like fruity, and so the idea that you could describe beers as like tropical and citrusy and all the stuff, but like not be sweet at all, and in fact be like super bitter.
Yeah,
just was not
the opposite. Yeah,
exactly. It was very foreign to me. Now, of course, like that's what I want, but sometimes I don't like it when my beers are too sweet.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so at this point you like hazies. Now I feel like your most recent evolution, unless I'm skipping a step, then stop me, but I feel like over the course of the last 20 episodes, you've started to appreciate stouts a lot more than you previously had.
I think so. I mean, I think that's probably, if I had to nail down one change that's occurred through the process of this podcast, really, it's been a deeper appreciation for stouts.
I've corrupted you.
Yeah, you got me, man. You knew it was only a matter of time, I guess.
It's inevitable.
It's interesting because I'm in a place right now where when I go to the beer shop and I'm looking for beers, I have a hard time committing to anything. Like, no matter what the style is, I have such a hard time being like, oh yeah, especially if I have to buy like a 4 or 6 pack of something. But even a single, I'm like, I don't know. Like, am I gonna like this? Like, it's a struggle right now. Do you find that at all with you, or are you less that way?
I think a lot of times I'm seeking experience, so I am less picky. I think like what I like to do is go to Total Wine or some place that will sell me singles and just try to grab as many things as I can that I've never tried before, just to be able to try new things. But it's funny because when you describe that problem, it made me think of like, I have that problem when I'm like on the Netflix menu.
Yes,
which I think
for
is
sure.
like it's a well documented effect where you're like, you want to watch something and you open Netflix and you spend like 30 minutes scrolling through all your options and then you're like, never mind. Is that what's happening to you in the beer store?
Yeah, definitely. It's like the joke, like if you had 5 minutes left to live and you can listen to any song you want, like what song would you pick? And then like, I would spend the 5 minutes trying to pick a song.
Yeah, and then you just die. That's pretty funny.
But no, I just think like it's kind of overwhelming, and there's just I mean, even Gozes and Berliner Weiss styles, right, which are light wheat sour styles, which I love. I love both of those styles. It's so hard to find a Gose. I mean, it's not hard to find a Gose. It's hard to find like just a Gose. They're fruited, or they're even like barrel aged now, or I had just the other day a blueberry Gose from Martin House. It was very good, and I did like it. It was 8%. I didn't think I'd ever like an 8% Gose. I mean, Martin House does a very good job of hiding their alcohol in their sours, so I do appreciate that. But like, it's still not very true to style.
I see what you're saying. It's really difficult to find. Yeah.
So even the sour styles, which I liked, have sort of evolved into these like smoothie sours, or just heavily fruited, whether that's filtered or not, like they're usually heavily fruited. And I get it. I understand why they're doing it, and I understand why they're popular, because I do like some of them. Sometimes it's hard because I'm searching the store and I just see all these like styles that I don't know. I liked, but they've evolved into something else. And so it's really hard to find something or even commit to something that I'm like, yeah, I mean, this will be good, but like, whatever. I've had a million of these, like, and maybe I do need to like just start getting into the stout world a little bit more.
Yeah, you might find that like refreshes your interest in craft beer if you kind of start exploring a new style. But no, I've definitely experienced the same thing of like you almost just get sick of craft beer altogether.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, you just have to take a step back from it, and I think you'll find that you'll like it again. But it is like, and it's kind of like, and it's been interesting to kind of see that side of it kind of as we've explored, obviously putting out the podcast, but then exploring social media too, of like, there is such an aspect to it of like coming out with the new thing so it can be popular, so you can get that Instagram hits. Like, it's kind of funny because it does kind of tie into that. I feel like a little bit of what a lot of the breweries are doing is kind of chasing those trends.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I think that is something, I think, to get established, unfortunately, because there's so many breweries, you almost have to do that. Meanwhile, like Sierra Nevada could just keep making pale ale, just like it's timeless, right? But yeah, if you're trying to break into an industry where a lot of people are trying to break in simultaneously, it is difficult. So I do feel like people kind of trying to push the envelope of trying new things, and like kind of what we talked about in our trends episode, putting cereal and beer and whatever they could think of.
Yeah, all the crazy adjuncts. So I went to Denver a few weeks ago and went to Wildworks, which I was very excited about. And they, of course, their IPAs are fantastic, but they also have great sours. And it was kind of fun to drink some of these like sours with interesting adjuncts or interesting flavor combinations. One with peanuts added for like a peanut butter jelly sour. There's another one that was used macadamia nuts, like a tropical sour. It was very, very good, but not on premises, but I took one home in a can. It was I think it's called just Goza, and it really is their just base Goza.
Oh, cool.
Mind blowing.
Really?
I mean, it was just a throwback. Like, it just took me back to my like drinking that Otra Vase and being like, this is the style I love. And even Otra Vase is not like true pure Goza, but man, I guess Ruben's Goza was one of my first ever like just straight Gozas. Ruben's Goza and the Kimmy the Ink and the Holy Goza from Anderson Valley.
Wow, those are very good ones to start on.
So those are my two like go-to base Gozas. But this Wildworks Goza was incredible. I mean, as soon as I smelled it, I was like, yes, they nailed it. And I didn't even have to drink it to know that it was perfect, because I just know the smell.
Yeah, you just recognize that.
Yeah. So it is nice that every once in a while I can get back to those true styles that I really like. I'd like to find a Berliner Weiss, like plain Berliner Weiss.
That's hard to find, because I see there's so many Berliner Weiss beers, but they all have.
Oh, it's basically, I actually feel bad now, because I think I think if you're coming into craft beer right now, you probably have seen Berliner Weiss style written on a beer.
Right.
And then but you don't know. You don't actually know what a Berliner Weiss tastes like, because all the breweries are using it as a base for their heavily fruited sours.
Yes.
So it says Berliner Weiss style sour with pineapple, bananas, coconut, and mango, and you're like, that
is not a Berliner Weiss. That's funny.
So it would be nice to see one of those again, because it's just one of those beers that takes me back.
Yeah, that'd be nice. It would be nice to see some of those, traditional styles, because they're so good and they're so proven, like through time. You almost don't. We're trying to like fix things that aren't broken, I think. But
yeah. So in some ways, like where I'm headed would be drinking simple beers.
Yeah.
And also maybe more complex beers.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I am kind of caught in this world of like fruited sour, another fruited sour, okay, that was good. It was okay. You know, like I get caught in this world because that's what's so popular now and so common.
Yes.
And like I know that like I know I like that world. Like I do like some of those beers, but it's not challenging at all to my palate. And that's I think like my next step is I need to challenge my palate, like get into barley wines, get into imperial stouts, even like I've got Jester King here, so like
Yeah, dude.
I can get in all sorts of weird stuff.
Hell yeah.
Grisettes and um yeah, weird stuff. Farmhouse saisons.
Yeah, I'm jealous of your proximity to Jester King, for sure.
Yeah, I probably don't take advantage of that as much as I should. But
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I mean, I do kind of feel like I'm very comfortable where I'm at right now, but I would also like to learn too. Maybe that's our goal for season 2 of the podcast. So the next 20 episodes, we need to drink as many barley wines as we can get our hands on. Although I feel like barley wine's one of those styles that they seem to come out like a certain time of the year.
yeah, I mean you can always get Bigfoot.
That's true.
You can usually find Bigfoot at least. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, so maybe we'll start to saison as well, or saison is another one. I do need to challenge myself on because I would like to get to the point where I appreciate every beer style. I think that's
maybe we should do a deep dive into saison, and then that's how.
Yeah, because that would make us like it.
Yeah.
Okay,
it usually works.
That's our next episode. We're gonna
may not work with.
I don't know. I felt the same way about bitter IPAs that I would never like them. So maybe one day I'll like that weird wet dog funk.
There's always the element of like pepper in saisons that gets weird to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Saison yeast is just a strange organism. Puts off some weird flavors.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan.
Kind of like champagne-y. It's like funky champagne. I don't know. Like very dry and like peppery.
The funny thing is I love the way it smells.
Yeah, I usually do too. There's always like a sort of a green apple smell to it.
But then
and I do like that funky. I do kind of like the funky smell. It just like, I don't know, it just doesn't come across very well in the taste to me. But I don't know. We'll have to try. It's probably hard to find a saison.
Like, yeah, it's a little tricky. Yeah, it's a little tricky. There's definitely a couple. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but like the local grocery store that has a really good beer selection probably has 1 or 2. But that's probably it. Yeah, it's a little bit of a hard style. So
what about like anything about your beer journey?
I mean, it's funny because where it's headed? Mine actually like followed a very similar path to you, except I feel like I was like a couple years ahead of you, and then you kind of followed my same path almost. But I feel like it was very similar because I had a very similar experience at Sierra Nevada. I had a very similar experience at Russian River with the barrel-aged sours. I had a very similar experience at Moonraker. It's like we had all these same experiences, except they were like slightly apart in time, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, I don't know.
You had like the sour days or whatever at Miraz.
That's true. So I knew I really like sours.
You had a lot more experience with sours than I did.
Yeah, I kind of went down the rabbit hole on sours. That was my big style for a while. And then, we have a local brewery in Miraz that does like an all sour day. That was really fun. That we've done a bunch of years in a row, albeit we missed the last one, but we'll make the next one. It's just I kind of the same thing as like I do need to explore. I feel like a couple more styles to round out the whole appreciation of the beer universe. I think my heart will always be in sours and barrel-aged stouts, but we'll see. Who knows? Maybe I could become maybe I'll really, really, really end up liking barley wine. I don't know, though. It's a tough one.
Yeah. How do you feel about IPAs now?
What's really funny is I loved West Coast IPAs, and I feel like I still do, but I really like New England IPAs as well. Like, actually, maybe next episode I'll drink it. I have a Hoptimum in the fridge, and I haven't had one of those in years and years and years. So I really want to return to it and see how I feel about it. But I don't know. I think I've softened maybe into the, not to say that it's softer, but it's definitely less bitter of a style of the New England IPAs. They're kind of more, they have, more of the tropical flavors and less of the hop bitterness. And I used to love and crave that hop bitterness. I think my go-tos were Torpedo was one of my main go-tos to get that bitter bite. I don't know. I think I've weakened to the dry hopping. So we'll see. I'll drink Optimum next week and we'll see how I react to it. Because I know that one's going to be bitter for sure.
Yeah. I am having a really hard time with IPAs lately.
Even New England? All IPAs?
All IPAs.
Really?
Yeah.
Elaborate on that.
I'm getting a little burnt out on them. Okay, so first off, a small disclaimer. I've been drinking beer all day long today. And maybe my I'm over beer attitude is coming out on this podcast. I apologize. I'm not over craft beer. We're going to continue doing this podcast. I love craft beer. It's just interesting to, when you start talking out loud about how you're feeling about different things, you start to sort of self-reflect and realize how you're feeling about what you're talking about. But yeah, my interest in IPAs has changed drastically. I am not that interested in buying them out of the store and drinking them at home. I do still like to get an IPA on tap. I more prefer a pale ale, something a tad less hoppy and a tad more malty, striking the balance between the two. I feel like that's the style that I seek out on tap for sure. And then what's interesting though, I just drank, I had one more Mount St. Humulus from Bale Breaker, and I drank it the other night.
Okay.
That was fantastic.
I love that beer.
It was it sort of rejuvenated my love of beer. Because like I said, I was getting into this funk of just fruited sours and, I drink a pseudo sue or something every once in a while. I love that beer. I always love that beer. But I was just kind of in this funk of not really knowing what I should buy or what to drink. And I saw that in my fridge. I was like, I need to drink that. It's getting, it's getting towards the end of it needs to be consumed. And it was fantastic. And I think I do think that this is why I am interested in moving into the barley wine style, because I think that's just the next stop from these very, very complex triple IPAs, because they're very sweet and malty but very hopped. And I just think barley wine is just the next evolution in my beer taste, because that triple IPA would just hit the spot. And this is a 10%er.
That's awesome that you had that experience with that beer. I was so sad because we bought them in person at Bale Breaker. We were so lucky to go on the day
I know, that was pure luck.
Yeah, and we brought that. I got a 4-pack and brought them back, and then I just drank the last one with a couple friends, maybe 4 weeks ago, and it was.
What did they think?
They really liked it. They were actually, my one friend was driving up north, and he's like, "Where did you get this?" And I was like, "Oh, Bale Breaker." And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna try to stop by." And I was like, "I don't think they're gonna have it anymore, dude. It's nope. They make that once a year." And he was like, "Oh, I'm sad," because they really, really liked it. And I was very sad sharing it. Not to share. I love sharing beer, but very sad that I was, that was the last one, because I knew the odds of us ever drinking that again are very low.
Right.
But that is cool.
Go to Seattle again in May, but.
Mm-hmm. But that is fun. That is cool that that one beer can reinvigorate your interest in a whole style.
And even opening it, I was like, am I even gonna like this again? Sometimes the experience of being in the brewery and especially being there with you and drinking it together and really thinking about it and parsing out flavors, is a whole nother experience than just drinking it at night. But man, I have to say, at the end of a hard day of work and just popping that open, and it was amazing.
Yeah, so. And that it's so true of world-class beer like that. I just think it's undeniable when you're drinking it, especially when you get onto the point where you can appreciate it too. Because I think you could drink that too early and you wouldn't fully appreciate it. And that's been kind of the joy of doing the podcast, is like my levels of appreciation are like layering on top of each other, because I feel like I'm learning to appreciate it more historically as we do our deep dives. And then also just as I'm kind of like continuously trying to challenge my palate. And then when you get to try something like that, it's such a pleasure. And it's so cool that they're doing that.
Yeah, and I think what I'm learning about myself too is that I am, like I said, I try to lean more towards like the American Pale Ale style, which is just a little bit more maltier. I think that's what I like about the triple IPA too, is that like the malt and the hop balance is so much more important to the style than it is to like the New England IPA, where it's just like a lot of dry hopping and very pale malts. Like I said, I used to like that. I used to like being able to parse out hop flavors without a lot of malt interference. But now I'm like starting to learn about that balance, you know?
Yeah.
Like my beer education has grown, but also just like now appreciating that balance and enjoying that balance taste wise. I think that's where kind of my beer palate is trending.
That makes sense. I mean, I never really thought of it that way until you just said it, but that New England IPA style, they're almost just deleting out the malt flavor, like just completely blanking it, which is almost like cheating, because there is sort of like an art form to balancing the malts and the hops. And I know they're doing that to kind of showcase the hops, but I don't know. Now that you say it that way, it's almost like inelegant that they're doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I it's just a way. It's just one way to brew beer.
That's true.
It works. You get beer at the end, and it's not a style that I didn't or even don't still enjoy. I just think in the evolution of my beer journey and my beer palate, I think I'm trending more towards liking a nice balance between malt and hops.
No, that makes sense. That's the cool thing. It is the cool thing about like craft beer, and I think a lot of people, if they're newer to the beer scene, they might kind of wonder like, does it get old? But I think your taste just continuously evolve, and then that's part of the fun of it, that you just kind of get into new things and you're kind of seeing things from different angles.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's like reading the same book every 10 years. And it's completely different because you're like at a different stage of life. You see different parts of it, or interact or reflect on the story of the characters in a completely different way.
Yeah, it's funny. We're going through the Marvel movies again in order.
Yeah.
With my kids.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny too, like the way I enjoyed it the first time versus this time. Like there's a lot of like nuance and character development and character emotions that make more sense now, like as a parent
That is super cool. And then obviously you get to see like what your kids latch on to, which is like probably completely different.
Oh yeah. And there's like a lot of the story like is going over their head because they're 9 and 7, so they're still somewhat obtuse to like the intricacies of the story. But they just like love like superheroes. And, like they just love like the good guy beats the bad guy kind of stories,
Appreciate that aspect of it, yeah.
So what's really funny is that like they have a hard time with like Loki, right? Like they're like, is he good or is he bad? And you're like, well,
it's a gray area, kid.
So it's fun like watching them explain that stuff. So yeah, it's cool to like revisit stuff. And hey, we revisited this first episode.
Yeah, this is the remix of our first episode
with good audio.
Yes, and
more beer education.
Yeah, we're slightly more knowledgeable. Ever so slightly more knowledgeable.
Ever so slightly.
Yeah. It's a big universe.
Well, and even just like my activity on Instagram and stuff, like it's just following all these breweries across the United States. It's just really cool to see like what they're doing and what's going on, and just getting a little bit more like beer news and more like giving you a finger on the pulse of craft beer has been very interesting and educational.
Yeah, that's super cool. Speaking of our Instagram,
if
you want to follow us, it's attenuation.podcast. And Steven's been crushing it. I actually have a picture I got to post.
Yeah, you do.
I drink I know, you're really holding it down. I drink a really good milkshake IPA called Crush Crush Crush. I have a cool picture. I have a picture.
Nice.
I'm going to put it up there. But yeah, you should follow us. We have over 40 followers. Over 40.
Way over.
Yeah, over 50, but we still say over 40.
Yeah, stay humble.
Stay humble. And then if you want to email us, you can email us at contact.attenuation@gmail.com.
Yeah, you got it. Don't you have it written down?
I do. But I added a lot of notes to the page. Hold on, I gotta scroll.
He was like, did it change? And I was like, no, bro, it's still the same.
Still the same. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for our revisit. And I think we'll have to do this again. Maybe we'll do it at the start of every season to kind of revisit where we're at in our beer tasting journey, because it does continuously evolve. And then I think we even figured out our next episode. So we'll do a Saison deep
dive
next week.
Oof, man, I gotta go Saison hunting.
Yeah, I know, me too. We gotta do research. Gotta learn about the style. So, all right. Well, that will be a wrap for this episode. My name is Jason, and I'm joined with my best friend since 8th grade, Steven.
That's me. I was waiting for you to see if you talked over me again.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Not like the intro. We'll get it down. We'll get it down by season 3.
Yeah, we got it.
So
I'll clean it up.
Clean it up and post. So we're saying cheers, and we will see you next week for episode 22.
All right, cheers, buddy.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Attenuation, a beer podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram or Facebook for more fun content. Catch you next week. Cheers!